Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope everybody's having a fantastic Wednesday so far. And yeah, thanks a lot for coming. Good to see some familiar names and Kerry, your familiar face. I'll wait a little bit longer for more people to arrive. But basically today, really excited to run you all through what we're seeing as the trends, the success stories, and the growing requirements from a supply chain engagement perspective and for businesses to better understanding where their impacts are generated, especially depending on the industry they're in, how much of their overall footprint is made up by their scope three or their broader environmental and social impacts from their supply chain. So, yeah, once again, thanks a lot for everyone here so far. I can see a few more people in the waiting room, and we'll look to get kicked off pretty soon. If anyone, as we go through, has any questions at all, please feel free just to sing out and ask. Really want to make today's session, a collaborative and yeah, talkative session. So please feel free to ask any questions if you have them. All right. Well, considering everybody will be eating lunch, I assume, and yeah, doing all that sort of stuff while I'm chatting, I'll probably get started so that we leave a bit of time at the end for questions. I'm also going to make Alex King from NetNada, who's our head of customer success, a co-host. So he'll be in the chat. He'll be able to answer any questions that come up in the chat. And if you do want to ask specific questions about any of the topics that I go over, please feel free to, either sing out yourself or to put the question in the chat for later on, and Alex can collate those questions. So as a starting point, I'll share my screen and we'll go from there. Fantastic. Okay, so as I said before, everyone, welcome to today's session on supply chain engagement. We're really, really excited to have you all here. And we're really, really excited to dive into what is needed from both a supplier's perspective and also what is needed from a company who's looking to understand their supply chain. We know that from everyone that registered, we've got a really nice, broad range and diverse range of subject matter expertise in the room. Some of you are consultants, some of you are software providers with considerable subject matter expertise in this industry. Some of you are from companies who are looking to better understand your supply chains. And of course, some of you are also from businesses who are trying to do whatever you can to stay compliant with the needs of your key clients. So hopefully today we'll go through, help you better understand what the requirements are on both sides of the fence here. As a starting point, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're all gathering from respectively. And I'd like to acknowledge any elders past, present, or emerging that are with us today. So it's obviously very important. I know this room is full of experts, so I won't spend too much time on hammering the classic scope 1, 2, 3s. But I think while doing an overview of the session, it is worth remembering, why this is also important, both from a carbon perspective, but a broader sustainability perspective. We want to be able to inform you on the best strategies on how to respond if you're being asked, or how to engage if it's something that you're trying to tackle as a company. And of course, we know that our scope 1 emissions are very direct emissions that occur from our direct fuel sources within a business. And our scope 2 emissions are from our energy consumption, from our electricity and our gas, where our scope 3 is where all of our supply chain based emissions sit. And for all of us who are supplying companies, we are a part of their scope 3. And equally, for all of us who have suppliers, even the smallest or most niche suppliers also still most of the time fit into our scope 3 emissions rather than the other scopes. And so it's really, really important for businesses where their lion's share of emissions, of course, come from their supply chain, to be able to engage directly with their supply chain and gather that information. So in today's session, we're going to really get our grips around what the current space is looking like, what's being requested from companies, really demystifying, understanding what you need to provide, and also having a look at some great success stories and case studies where we can see what's been done well and how we can potentially replicate that. So I think it makes sense at this point to take a bit of a step back and take a bit of a global snapshot of what's occurring around the world in some key markets that NetNada is currently operating in, and that we're seeing particular movement in. Starting with Australia, where most of us here on the call are from and living and working, we know that the mandatory reporting is coming just around the corner, which is, of course, not only forcing the larger companies to understand their scope 1 and 2 emissions, but it's also forcing them to start thinking about their scope 3 emissions, because as soon as 2 years, we're going to have mandates for these larger companies on their supply chains. And so this straight away has already started to create the ripple effect. It's one of the big reasons why we are doing what we're doing, and one of the big reasons why we're having this webinar today is because we know that everyone is equally together feeling that pinch, if you will, of your key clients starting to ask you for information. Now, whether it's occurring in the US, the UK, Europe, Australia, Africa, Southeast Asia, wherever in the world, we know that it's more and more common now for businesses, and for some businesses with large and diverse client bases, to be getting asked for this information a few times a week even, okay? And so what the big struggle is how do we create a way to respond at mass to all of the different clients who are asking for this information, and how do we make sure that you have a uniform and covered response when you get asked from one key client this week and another key client next week. Now, in the US, we've seen very exciting shifts in the last 12 months towards SEC reporting and their climate disclosures. Of course, this will depend on which government wins the next election. But if it's a Republican government, we'll see a lot of these removed. If it's a Democrat government, we'll see these stay and actually picked up. But regardless, what we're going to see is a continued effect of the large companies in the US following the UK and Europe reporting requirements that have been set and that have been running and that have been setting the example for multiple years already. So the climate-related financial disclosures consultation paper, which was released by Jim Chalmers in June 2023, has undergone a few changes and has also been pushed back on a delivery perspective. This was done because the government made an amendment off the basis that they didn't believe that industry was ready for the reporting requirements that were being imposed on them. And I think this in itself is really reflective of today's topic, because if the big companies with huge teams of over 500 employees and over $500 million of revenue were deemed to not be ready to report, we need to take a really close look on why and how we're expecting smaller companies to be able to report to the same standards, same frameworks, and aligned in only a slightly longer period. So it's really important that more and more people within an organization become up to date and become familiar with these reporting requirements. The reason NetNada is hosting these webinars, and we're going to be hosting them weekly, is because we want to be there as that supporting educational group that can help you understand what you need to do and can demystify some of the worries around these requirements, because we understand not every business can have a chief sustainability officer. We understand that for a lot of you in this room, this might be a second hat that you're wearing, and maybe, you're wearing that hat while you're eating lunch and you're trying to do a bunch of other things at the same time. And so what we've been working on creating is enabling you to have a bit of a checklist, if you will, to understand what you need to be considering and what you need to be reporting on, depending on who your clients are, depending on what industry you're in, and depending on where you operate and how large you are. And so with that in mind, it's very, very important to be thinking industry specific, and considering, especially if you are in an industry that is highly either government supported or where a lot of your key clients are government, this is going to be hitting you a lot faster, and you've probably already received some of the information to report. And so we'll go through basically what is to be expected, and what you should have ready in your back pocket from a reporting perspective for those industries. Now, sustainable procurement is really the goal of why we're doing all of this supply chain engagement. It's critical for sustainable procurement to be supported with accurate and reliable data. What we've seen in the past is a lot of sustainable procurement policies have been very much well-intentioned, but they haven't necessarily had the insights or the accuracy for any real measurements to occur off them, right? And what we're saying is that with the ability to engage with now all of your suppliers because of the technical capabilities that exist, you can then also start to get much more accurate understandings of what's occurring in your supply chain, not just from a carbon perspective, but more broadly speaking from your overall sustainability. Once you have those accurate insights, you can then start to make your actionable decisions. And this is the basis around good sustainable procurement policies that are led by data. With that said, it's important to remember that this is also what your key clients are trying to do with you. And so this becomes an area where you can differentiate, where you can excel past your existing competitors, or you can stand out as a preferred supplier on a contract that you already hold, or you can potentially score higher in the tender process as well. And so the big benefits for businesses are treating this like a compliance activity, but also acknowledging the fact that this has huge customer success or huge client outcomes, and also huge potential business development benefits as well. So what does this look like from a larger business's procurement standpoint? What are they looking for? And as such, what should you be considering? They're all going to need to report on their related risks, their sustainability related risks. And this is both from their own operations and their supply chains, but also from an investor perspective. So they have to have a clearly outlined sustainability matrix and strategy that shows where these risks and opportunities sit. And you as a supplier, you sit within that. So the more data you can provide and the more insights you can give to these clients, the better you score from a risk perspective. They're going to be identifying not only who's currently supplying them already and who has, who scores well from a risk perspective, but also what database they can use and what they can go to find better suppliers. So you can not only be on their existing data sets of suppliers, but you can also get into procurement opportunities by being acknowledged as a sustainable supplier. And I see that we have Naomi from Giveable here, and platforms like Giveable are perfect opportunities for businesses who are looking to be recognized as a potential sustainable supplier and open themselves up to more opportunities with these big companies who are trying to align their procurement. And lastly, they're also going to be looking at where any gaps sit, where any boundaries need to be reconstructed, and if there are any things that they don't have granular data on. Now, this means, and this is what we're seeing occurring at the moment, is they're going to be coming to you as a supplier, and they probably already had, asking for specific information. Okay. Now, when they're asking for that specific information, they are asking for probably a subset of about 110 questions. And so the goal here from today is to be able to put you in a position where you have all the information so that you can answer those questions. The key boundaries that they set and the key criteria that they set around those questions are really no different to how you should be looking at your own sustainability. It leans on, the donut economics idea of understanding both your environmental and your social impacts, and really knowing not just one aspect of your sustainability, but considering the overall ESG picture. So it's very, very important that along with a set of carbon accounts, you also have the right information from a planning perspective. You have the right information from a strategy perspective, but you also have the right information from specific units of measurement around your environmental performance, whether that be waste or energy consumption. You also have the right information around what you're doing in your communities, and how you're managing your social impacts as well. So the best thing you can possibly do is to be looking at your sustainability holistically, and really not just pigeonholing yourself into thinking, okay, I've got carbon sorted, I'm good. You need to consider that these businesses, yes, care a lot about how you sit from a scope 3 perspective, but they are also trying to get a holistic picture of your overall ESG. So the key dates that are coming around the corner. Well, we've had this first key date pushed out, and I think it's important to sort of keep it as what was the key dates and how that's been pushed out. So the new key date is the 1st of January 2025, which is coming around quite soon. And this is where we're going to see all of these big companies with their first set of reports, and they'll also, more importantly, be now 1 year out from their scope 3 reporting requirements.
Could you
After that, the group 2 companies are going to come in. So this is dropping the bar to the $250 million and 250 plus employee spots, which very quickly will start to affect much smaller businesses who are supplying to those sort of medium cap size companies. And then moving into 2026, 27, we're going to have $100 million revenue companies, 100 plus employees, which really is thousands and thousands of businesses around Australia. But we're also going to see them being required to report on their supply chains. What this says is you can guarantee in the next 2 years that you'll be being asked by multiple of your clients, no matter how big they are, to be reporting to you. So the best thing you can do is to have a uniform response from a time and effectiveness perspective to make sure that you've got all the information there, and it's just as simple as sending it over. So what's being asked for in these supplier engagement activities? When you're either engaging with your supply chain or when you're being asked by someone else, as I mentioned before, we're looking at a few key criteria areas, and these are broken over a bunch of different questions and data points, but the tick box areas that you should be asking yourself if you're covered on are, first and foremost, your sustainability planning and procedures. Secondly, your energy consumption. Are you using green energy? What's the mix in your PPA? Next, your water and your chemicals. How are you treating wastewater? What sort of chemicals are you using if you're a business who has this information? Has this consumption? What's your waste and recycling? How are you diverting waste from landfill? Do you have a waste management strategy and plan in place? And do you have forecasts on your current, based off your current performance? These are where the questions are very much data centric. So if you don't have a system in place to measure the units of measurement and the activity data within these key criteria areas, you'll score quite badly. Your material efficiency. So if you're a product based company, this is key consideration. Do you have any LCA information? Do you have information about any waste or offcuts that get created during your process? Your social considerations, as I pointed out before, this is where we're considering, modern slavery statements, labor rights, diversity, equity, inclusion, and community impacts. And then lastly, compliance and certification, and especially when you're in those key industries, as I was mentioning before, with that are are highly connected to government procurement, or maybe specific industries like the hospitality industry. Do you have compliance with some of those key industry certs? So as an activity after this, and NetNada has a bit of a checklist for this information. We'll be sending around an email to all of the attendees to give you access to the checklist to see how you score on if you were being asked. And what we're trying to do is really, lift the lid, if you will, on how procurement teams look at their own supply chain sustainability, and act almost as, your sustainable procurement manager from one of your key clients to show you how you're ranking. So we'll send you around something after this that basically gives you the opportunity to see how you'd be scoring in that context. Now, it's really, really important to look at some of the big winners from the last 12 months when it comes to supply chain engagement and actually achieving supply chain action. Of course, it's very easy for big companies who have huge influences on their supply chain to I guess use the carrot and the stick analogy to force either a very incentivized action or to just simply give an ultimatum for their suppliers to comply and come along on the sustainability journey. But I think before jumping into these success stories, it is important to note that one of the resounding commonalities across the success stories and case studies is their ability to work with their suppliers. The ability to provide that support to suppliers of all different shapes and sizes, to not give them a one-stop, this is it solution. Because at the end of the day, it's about making sure that even your smallest supplier who doesn't have the resources to go to typical consultancy or anything like that, still has the ability to engage, to analyze, and then report back. So as that said, I think AstraZeneca they are the shining light example, in my opinion, for how to do supply chain engagement. They managed to get 95% of their supply chain to report to them aligned with the Science Based Targets Initiative. Look, the SBTIs is a difficult thing to report to. It takes a considerable amount of work, and typically, requires in-house expertise to make sure that all reporting complies. And AstraZeneca did an incredible job of not only giving their suppliers the right amount of time and preparation ahead of this requirement, but also working with them through that process, and also making sure that they were connected with all the right resources and support that were required to get this done. 95% in their terms is about 3,500 suppliers, which is an incredible result. It's also suppliers in industries that, or in areas that really haven't had to think about sustainability before. So they did a very, very good job, and they've got some very good guidelines online of how they helped suppliers from manufacturing versus how they help suppliers from professional services versus how they help suppliers in different countries where these mandates haven't been implemented yet. And so, definitely worth taking a look into AstraZeneca. The other thing that AstraZeneca did really well, and there's a lot of good resources online, which we'll share afterwards, but is helping with the education and the training side of things, providing the professional development information to be accessible so that suppliers understood what to do. And lastly, what they did as well, they helped them paint the picture of why this was important. They helped them understand how they each sat in terms of benchmarks, and they helped them understand why it was relevant even for the smaller suppliers. This brings in the point of material and what is material or immaterial. There are lots of different ways and methods to go about your supply chain engagement, and some larger companies will do this based off spend, and who are key suppliers based off spend. Others will do it based off emissions, and they'll make assumptions on who their key suppliers are from an emissions perspective. But what AstraZeneca did was really take a blanketed approach, and I think that shows really great leadership that, leans into the ethos that everybody's got a part to play. And I think AstraZeneca being able to get even their small suppliers to engage is a really great point there. So with that said, when you're deciding to do a supply chain engagement, no matter how big you are, everybody has a part to play. So even if you are a small SME, or even if you're advising to a small SME, there is still the opportunity for them to do a supply chain engagement. And the beauty of this is, even if you're a small SME and you've got suppliers who you may not be their biggest earner, there's a good chance that they're being asked to do this anyways. And there's beginning to be some uniformity in the data that they can provide. So the approaches that you want to go about when you're looking to decarbonize and align with, as you can see, these goals as we race towards net zero. If you're a business that understands that the majority of your emissions come from your scope 3, you want to do everything you can to move away from the assumption-based analysis. You want to do everything you can to communicate early with your suppliers why you're doing this and what approach you're looking to go through. And if you are looking to bucket your suppliers into different key groups, you want to let them know how they sit in there. So for example, if you are going after where your key emissions come from, you want to communicate with your clients what groups and industries they are with, and why they are defined as one of the key emissions areas. Same goes if you're doing it based off who you spend the most money with and who your key suppliers are in that sense. You want to let them know, maybe how many other suppliers you're reaching out to, and why you believe as one of your key suppliers they're so important to your sustainability. Once you've done this, it's about being able to provide them with the right amount of touch points and contacts. Whether you do this with NetNada or with anyone else, what we find is having multiple touch points within the same organization is really, really important. As you can appreciate, the chief sustainability officers are often very, very much under the pump and have so many different things that they're trying to tackle. But also at the same time, often a lot of the data might be coming from the finance team, or a lot of the motivations might be coming from other aspects of the business. So the approach we find works the best is to not only go out to one person in the company, but to go out to multiple, and to make this an activity of you working with them rather than just requesting information off them and being the bad guy, if you will. Okay, this is a collaborative thing. We know that sustainability is something that everyone needs to buy into, and so you need to approach it in that way. It's really important that they don't feel like they're being attacked from the get-go, but rather that they're being given the opportunity to work with you. The last thing that needs to be considered is, yes, we are moving from a nice to have to a license to operate. However, with that said, you need to make sure that you're giving your suppliers the support that they require to actually get this done. Okay, so that might be having preferred consultants and advisors that you can refer them to. That might be having a calculator or a system that you can refer them to use. But you really need to make sure that you're removing any of those technical or operational barriers that might be there for your suppliers. You need to make this something that you're also supporting from your end as well. With that, it means that you can forward plan, you can get ahead of some of the technical barriers and the roadblocks that we often see. We know that from an internal resourcing perspective, this needs to be the type of thing that they can do once and then replicate. So it's really, really important that you also look to speak with any of your industry peers, any association bodies that you might be a part of, or even speaking with your competitors. It's what we're seeing is the companies who are the most successful here are the most collaborative. And so if you know that your competitors are probably asking their suppliers of the same thing and you may share suppliers, it's about working with everyone in your industry to make sure that you're asking the same questions. Those internal resources are very hard to come by, as we know. And so making sure that, yeah, this is a do once and share multiple times activity is key. Second is letting them know where they are benchmarked is also a very important step. We all know the classic saying, you can't fix what you can't measure, and I think it gets used and used and used in this space more than anything. But it's really, really important to at least tell them where they're starting from, okay? And you can tell them where they're starting from because you have benchmark information on their industry if you've done any form of input-output analysis. From there, it's about refining the data. It's about working with them to improve the quality. The whole thing around that leans into, we're basically always trying to refine all of the data that we get from suppliers. Okay, so you have an assumption, you have a baseline figure that you're working from, and you've done that calculation before you're trying to do any reductions. This whole process is about enriching the information that you have so that we can both look retrospectively on what's already occurred, but as pointed out a little bit earlier on, so that we can start to be looking with a bit of foresight and start to build this into our sustainable procurement policies. Okay. The reality is of the scenario that every company is in whenever they choose to start their supply chain engagement and whenever you get engaged as a supplier is they're trying to balance between looking back and looking forward. And so the important thing there is to set a date and time, set when you're aligning with the key frameworks that you're looking to operate within, and then moving from there. The transparency piece is not to say that you should be sharing your supply chains with the public or with or with your competitors, but more so you need to be encouraging your suppliers to share their information and to be open to questions. Sustainability only works if all of the information is auditable, and auditability is obviously the key part of transparency. That's basically everything from today. So happy to open up the floor to questions for the last 15 minutes. But if you have any questions, please let me know. As I mentioned as well, we have lots of additional resources that we're going to send around after this, including the checklist of where your business sits, the recording of the webinar, and also the case studies and examples and resources for reference.
Hey, Lochie, Tim
Awesome.
here. And hello, Alfonso. I've got a question relating to technology. Technology emissions. I'm doing quite a lot of work in this space at the moment. So I think end user compute devices, so laptops, phones, that kind of stuff, which we all have, we all use, and cloud software, telecom, that kind of stuff. What your level of confidence is around what large organizations are sharing around emissions, because I'm seeing some real challenges and problems, both in the data they present, the timeliness of it, the product granularity, all that kind of stuff. I'm really wanting to try and help people lift the level of confidence they have around that, because at the moment, if you just
Tim, do you wanna mention to the particular story you kind of alluding to of the past few weeks?
There's lots of stories. Okay, so the scenario I'm working with at the moment is a sustainability lead or function is requesting data from a tech team or from their service provider around emissions that they need to incorporate as part of their overall report, is what you've just been talking about. And the data is not critically assessed or understood correctly. So in the scenario that Alfonso is asking me to share is that there is a false perception it is totally inclusive. In actual fact, it's only reporting 5% of emissions. So there's a wrong impression being built. And I am seeing this everywhere at the moment, which means that we are opening ourselves up for a short-term sense of confidence in what we're reporting and the granularity, but it's actually missing 95% of what it should be reporting, which is really exposing people to a litigation risk. Once the climate disclosure regulation is in force, that's a tricky spot to be in. So I'm trying to lift the awareness around what is in this data and what's not, because we need to call out those risks. It's a very long question, but I'm
Yeah.
just seeing it everywhere at the moment.
Just giving my 2 cents on that, especially I guess in the cloud computing space as an example. I think it's also understanding like the materiality for the company who's ingesting the data, in a sense of, if I know that I don't have massive cloud infrastructure costs that I'm asking Amazon to host or whatever it might be, then maybe like the bias on that data is not as relevant for my own reporting. It is opening space for that company that's under reporting to be open for litigation. To bypass that, I think companies, especially the more advanced ones, can go around information that's being shared and actually calculate those emissions based on like the closest primary data that they have available. Go to available research and seeing like for example, device usage and cloud usage. When it comes to the litigation itself, when people are underreporting, and this is what we saw, is like even the ACCC cases that have happened in the past, like the fines so far, like a bit of a slap in the wrist and nothing much. I think until we see those fines for making those very big mistakes or kind of avoiding the elephant in the room, I don't think we'll see companies changing their behavior and not being super clear on what they're reporting. That's my 2 cents, but I think only time will tell when it comes to the underreporting or the misinterpretation of the reports.
Yeah, I think as long as the consumer, so people on this call, are aware that there are gaps in their reporting and they can call it out, they can make assumptions around what it should be, or they can just say it's not there. Embedded emissions in laptops, for example, is one that's commonly missed out. Yeah.
Yeah, and not only that, but I see people will move from just when sharing this information, saying this is my number, this is my certification, to be able to link that back into a document that actually explains what has been included or not included. In the past wasn't best practice, but hopefully with new disclosures, you actually have it doesn't matter how small you are, just having like the process or the methodology that you use to calculate and report on those final emissions.
I actually think it'll go past a document as well, Tim. Like, I think a very good example in the last few weeks has been that Tesco has started to build out digital passports for their product providers and produce providers. And so it's going past like a submission thing, but it's going more into a blockchain capability where you've got total insight over very granular information of suppliers. So I think to Afonso's point, time will definitely tell, but it's definitely in that direction that I believe it's moving.
Yeah, when it's supply chains, there's a lot of organizations like Tesco, for example, that are putting a lot of the emphasis in their reduction transition plan on everyone else but themselves. So I'm seeing that in Australia too, which is that's not part of the game, people. This is an all hands job.
Well said, well said. Very well said. Yeah, Abdallah.
No, I just have a comment on that. So, like, I work in IT, and I've been I was having this kind of discussion with one of my ESG consultants here at Courts, and so in my recent IT changes, I started including bits like the carbon emissions or carbon footprint or digital carbon footprint that we reduce by reducing unused resources on Azure cloud, let's say. But like that's what the discussion we were having, that where to report this, because there is no, so if you go to Clean Energy Australia or the Acer, like you don't get any emission factors from Acer website about IT. Like they have the electricity consumption, but they don't have carbon emissions associated with IT specifically. For that, then you have to go to Climate IQ, and then you need to find the emission factors from the CDP. So I think it's more around the people not knowing where to get the data from, and like which section or where. So this one thing which we were talking about is that, okay, if I have 20 servers in Azure cloud, and I'm using it, so from Azure's perspective, my 20 servers are their scope 1. but from my perspective, they are their scope 3. So this is a debate that we were having, and we clearly didn't got the concept of it, like where we should be reporting it. Like, so my usage in Azure, and this is a question for you guys as well. If pardon me if I didn't get it in the first time. Like, where those emissions will be reported? Like, will they be our scope 3, or will these will be our scope 1? So, for example, if I have 20 servers in Azure, and I want to say that, okay, this is what I am producing on a per month basis in terms of carbon equivalent. So would it be like the scope, would it be our scope 3 or would it be our scope 1?
Yeah, you will have, if both companies will publish documents, like your company and Azure, you'll see those emissions pop up in like a double reporting. But the way it belongs to changes depending on the reporting entity. So for you will be that scope 3,
Scope
right?
3, yeah.
That you kind of push out into the world.
Hmm.
For the generating company, you'd see that electricity consumed to run those services at the scope 1. But the total amount of the total number will show up in both companies.
Right.
And that is not a problem. It's just the clarity of reporting.
Of reporting, yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that we are basically working on getting a tool, I think it's called Open Carbon, Carbon Disclosure Project, and they basically have their application that basically connects to your cloud tenancy, and in the real time it tells you like what is your carbon emission of your pretty much of your whole workload or throughout the tenancy. So yeah, I think that's the comment. I don't know, but like these were my pain points. So thanks for listening.
Abdullah, you're very lucky. Azure actually includes scope 3 as part of their reporting, and they're probably the best of the 3, let's say. At the moment, there's still room to move, but tooling is important. I would really encourage you to look up the FinOps Foundation. So they're 16,000 people globally, part of Linux. There's a community in there called GreenOps, and that might be relevant to giving you some tutorials and support around technical functions around green operations. And it's excellent stuff. It's been laid out of the UK. Yeah, I totally endorse all that stuff.
Can you just, sorry, I didn't catch the name. Can you just write the name in the
I'll
chat?
post it in the chat.
If you can, that would be great. That would be great, Tim. Thanks, guys.
All right. Any other questions?
What have we got? Awesome.
Don't believe so.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions. If anyone has any questions that pop up, please let us know. Also, Abdullah, there's been some really interesting movements in the pressure from big tech, of course, around their concerns with the emissions related to this AI boom that's occurring. And yeah, so we'll send around some information around that as well, because
it's terrifying, Lachlan. I talk about this every day at the moment. So Microsoft are building 500 data centers globally to meet AI consumption. The capital investment globally in AI is $200 billion this year alone, which has already exceeded peak oil, which is just a frightening number. And I'm hearing now, if you apply the Gartner hype curve, it's starting to go on the turn a bit. People are starting to demand line of sight to the returns and the business benefits. So expect to see a bit of a trough of disillusionment around AI projects at the moment. 80% are considered not generating benefits. So we're about to have a bit of a winter around AI. AI has, after all, been around for 60, 70 years. This is just the current iteration going on at the moment. But it's disappointing money's been taken away from climate and sustainability solutions and gone into a non-proven case study. I don't know, but
yeah, no, Tim, it's very interesting, and maybe we take up picking your brain on some of that content, and we set up another webinar where we can.
Happy to. It's important. Every business engages and uses technology. We need to make sure that we have a good understanding around sustainability and climate impacts because of use of technology. Whether it's your own devices, whether it's what you consume from the cloud or a service provider, it's really important we understand all that.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I know that environmental product disclosures are becoming and declarations are becoming a much bigger part of data centers requirements to work with these big AI giants. But yeah, that's the amazing information you got there about the comparisons to the oil industry. That's
I
crazy.
think that was in the Financial Times last week, and it just when you see numbers like that, it's like, whoa, okay, somebody's wrong. Big checks.
Yeah, for sure, Fantastic. Well, with that as a note, maybe to close, everyone, thanks for joining for lunch, and you've got a bit of an insight into what could be a webinar in about a month's time or a few weeks time with Tim. But we will make sure to share all of the resources afterwards. If there's any other questions that have been provoked as a result of this discussion, please don't hesitate to reach out. But yeah, it was great to have the chance to share lunch with you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lochie.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Bye.